My own background is very similar to Ed Hoffman's, in that I'm a social scientist and I'm also Brooklyn born and bred. So I think we're the only, right, that's right. Ed and I always share that. I'd like to talk to you today about the search for the Holy Grail. Now that probably surprises you, but what it is another way of talking about collaboration within organizations, any organization. And this has been, it's an interesting issue because if it could be summed up, if it could be decided by engineering or scientific or mathematical means, it would have been. We've had large organizations in the world since the mid to late 19th century when large-scale tasks had to be done by one organization. The railroads in the United States, cotton mills in England, steel and chemical manufacturing in Germany, and steel and weapons and ordnance in Japan. So we've had these organizations now, large-scale, multitask, complex organizations, about 1860 to today, and no one's figured it out. What does that tell you? Interesting issue. It can't be solved, and there's no sort of algorithms, there's no formula. I occasionally write articles for a magazine called Management Science, but it's a stupid title. There is no science to management. None of this stuff is scientific. It's heuristic, it's case-based, commonsensical. Before I go on, let me tell you, you're welcome to ask questions or interrupt. There's nothing to interrupt. It's in my head. Just speak up. I mean, we have a limited amount, but be my guest. So I'd like to, but organizations have to collaborate. Why are we talking about this subject? Why is it so important? What do you think? Why are we talking about collaboration? Quick answers. What do you think it's valuable? Maybe you don't, which is possible.
Better products.
Better products. You get better products if people collaborate. What else?
You don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice. Why not it?
Project-based environment, interdisciplinary, you've got to work with other people.
Or that really fail. Right. Any other reasons? Synergies. You could different types of knowledge help each other. What else?
One and one makes three.
Yeah, one and one makes three. Exactly. Better product. How about this? It's where all your money is spent. All your money is spent on knowledge. And if you don't use it, it's like throwing it away. In the United States last year, I just read this marvelous stuff. Sometimes I read economics because I'm a bit of a masochist. And it's really murderous stuff to read, but you get interesting insights. Last year in the United States, $1 trillion was spent on intangible investments. $1 trillion. That's almost the exact amount that was spent on hard goods. So for every dollar spent for an organization buying a chair, they spent it on patents, copyrights, training, intellectual, meetings like this. That's a lot of money. If you don't collaborate, you're just throwing that money away. It's absolutely worth it. It's like having a factory that's not being used. Sir, speak up. Good.
Compare that to other countries like
Yeah.
Japan or Europe?
Yeah, we're about the same. If you look at Europe as a whole, it's a little less. Some countries, it's much more. And it's just the countries you'd imagine. The countries that don't have natural resources but do very well. I mean, there's a wonderful study by the World Bank that compared Korea to Nigeria from 1960 to today. 1960, Korea and Nigeria had the exact same GDP per capita. Ever been to Nigeria or know anything about it? How would you characterize it? They have it all. God bless that land. Oil, gas, minerals, they got it all. What does Korea have? Koreans. That there's nothing there. Nothing. So 1960, they're equal. Today, Korea's GDP per capita is equal to a poorer European nation, Spain, Portugal, or Greece. Nigeria went downhill. So what do you think? Why is that the case? Nigeria spent all the money on warfare, on armies, and weaponry. Korea spent it all on human capital development, intangible development, pays off. Israel, Singapore, Finland, they're all higher. But in large countries, Brazil should. Large countries, Europe in general is about the same as the US, Japan, a little bit less. But that's a huge amount. If you built a factory and you didn't run the factory, if you built a plant and didn't run it, you'd have to take it off as a deduction. It'd be stupid. If you invest in knowledge and don't collaborate, it's the same thing. We just don't have the same measures for it. So, sir, speak up. Good.
Sir, where all this money coming from? I mean,
You and me,
grant
man.
money,
I just doing my taxes, that's what
you
it is.
know,
These are budgets. This is private, corporations and government. What do you think this meeting's a perfect example. We did a gigantic account sheet of the United States. This meeting would go under intangible investment. How much does NASA spend on intangible? It must be a pretty penny. It's everything that isn't hard goods. Training, development, science, lab work. You're not producing something tangible. It's an intangible. I mean, it's certainly valid. It's an intangible. Your money and mine. It's all the wealth that's created. That's where it gets distributed. Pretty interesting. All that money, all that time and effort. And we don't know how to measure it. We don't know what to do with it. And it's only been the last 20 years that people really started thinking about it. I just read another interesting book by some well-known professors on organizational capital. What's the capital of an organization? I don't mean the capital like Albany's the capital of New York. What's the capital structure of an organization?
their intellect.
Pardon?
Their intellect.
Well, that's a big chunk of it. I mean, it's relationships. I was talking to Ed at the break. I mean, the relationships you have is a way. Don Cohen and I have known each other many years, wrote a book on social capital. Relationships are an enormously valuable form of capital. Brand, reputation, knowing how to do something. These are all parts of organization just as much as money, as machines, as incredibly exotic and fascinating technologies that NASA and other groups have. If you look at it, if we did a real balance sheet of NASA or any organization, what we'd find, every bit as important as the physical manifestations would be relationships, know-how, savvy, and solid knowledge. And I was looking through the little biographies of all the collective knowledge in this room. People with advanced degrees, working at NASA. I mean, it's a remarkable amount of stuff. So this is a huge amount. How much do firms pay for knowledge? Organizations. I'm sorry, I live in a more commercial world generally, so I'm used to saying firm. How much do you think organizations pay for knowledge? I worked for IBM for 6-7 years. So IBM, the biggest expense they have is knowledge, and it's not just R&D. It's not just knowledge in the labs. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I joined IBM when I was 51 years old. So let's say you had someone 30 years old with the same education. That person has more energy than me, probably nicer, thinner, have hair, a better prospect, right? But they paid me 10 times what they pay that person. What did they buy? Experience, yeah. Experience is a tricky word, though. It's the biggest context of knowledge, but there's a line in the Quran. People should, I guess, not too politically correct to quote the Quran, but it's a great line. It says, the ox that goes to Mecca is still an ox. You can have experiences and not learn anything from them. Some of you have alluded to things like that in the presentations I've seen. I've been married more than once, so I can certainly tell you that you can have experiences and not learn things from them. I mean, there's plenty. If you raise children, you learn this too. So experience, although it's the basis for knowledge, doesn't translate automatically into knowledge, although it's hard. So knowledge is a tricky thing to measure, individually, collectively, for countries. There's a lot of people working on this issue. How do you measure this? We'll come back to this a little bit. So I just wanted to talk about why collaboration is important. It's the most expensive thing we have. It costs us the most. If we underutilize it, which we do, because we don't know it's not measurable, you're wasting your money. What percent of the knowledge in a commercial organization do you think is actually used in any way? It's very interesting. Take a commercial organization, and it probably is just as true for government agencies, maybe even more true. Yeah, that's a good guess, about 10 to 15. That's exactly right. Why isn't the rest used? Pardon? You don't always need it? Well, sure, yeah. I mean, I know a lot about the geography of Brooklyn, and it doesn't come out much. No one asks me about it. So, but what about generally, and this gets to the heart of what we're talking about, what I'd like to talk to you about, when organizations don't collaborate, when they don't use the knowledge they have, you can look at this traditionally, put on. Don't get older. There's the best advice I could give you. Got to wear glasses and stuff. Traditionally, it was viewed as one of two problems: unable to share knowledge or unwilling to share knowledge. Those are the two sort of general categories. Now, unwilling is something I don't think we have to spend a lot of time with. That's less true in NASA. It's not even that true, except in some real, there are organizations that are run like decathlons, where everyone's running against everyone else, and people are miserable and they kill each other. All the Wall Street firms are like this. Let me just tell you that. Disney's. Pardon?
I'd like to interrupt you now.
Sure, go ahead.
I take exception to your premise there.
Which
There's things that people don't want to tell, and there's things that they can't.
Well,
Can't tell.
can't tell because they don't know.
Knowledge of
Yeah,
knowledge that they're
they don't know who to give it to or how to give it.
right, but I don't think that's really the case.
Yes.
I think that there are so many things to know that, and there are subjects that you're interested in, and you don't have to know everything to work on a subject that you're interested in. But as you move along from subject to subject, it is nice to have that vast amount of knowledge to draw upon. And it's not a matter of, you're right, there are people that don't want to tell you anything, and there are things that we do not know. But there are a whole lot of things that is known that we just do not know how to draw upon.
That's exactly what I mean by that. That's exactly what I mean by unable, because you just either don't have the knowledge or don't know who has it.
Well, I take exception to not able. I think there are ways to increase our understanding
There are.
of what is known.
There are, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But as it stands today, well, what percentage of knowledge at NASA do you think is used?
Probably 10.
So we're talking about 90% that it might be useful, not all the time and not every moment, but it might. Haven't all of you had the experiences you say, I wish I knew someone who knew this who I could call on? Sir.
I'm sorry, I mean, really quick, the shuttle program is a good example because of the schedules. When issues come up, the folks are normally limited to their sphere of influence. Who do I know that knows about this? Instead of saying who in the agency.
Right. And what would be the optimal answer?
And then return to flight kind of was different, where everybody was involved. The research center, the flight center, everybody was involved. And it kind of showed that there was expertise in all kinds of places that were not being used before because we weren't looking.
And you didn't know where it was. Well, I mean, and this is really what you're talking about, I would add, is that there's a great phrase Alvin Toffler used called the diseconomies of complexity. When you work in a large, complex organization, which you do, that's geographically dispersed, that's cognitively dispersed, there's a diseconomy. It's the opposite of working in one factory where you make widgets, one widget. That has economies of scale. The second widget is much less than the first, and you can mathematically plot out how much the widgets cost. Here you have diseconomies of complexity, and many organizations have this, big ones, geographic. You can imagine what IBM or Citicorp, I do work with the World Bank. I was there yesterday. The World Bank has that, and so does you do. The stuff you work with is complex. You're geographically dispersed. You have political issues and complexities. It's a complex business, so it's a diseconomy of scale. So people here generally aren't unwilling. Don Cohen mentioned in his presentation something when organizations have a mission, generally, the people who work in them are pretty willing to share knowledge. General rule. It's not Wall Street. It's not a commercial firm. There's more a culture of equity. There's a culture of non-equity in commercial organizations that is getting stronger and really harms them. But it's not true here. It's not true in government aid. It's not true in any organization that has a mission beyond how much money can I get. I mean, if you work in a commercial, that's what they're doing. People say, I'm working for money. I'm going to get as much as I can. If I have to step on you to get it, I might do that. If I can use you, I might. That's different here. It's different in the World Bank. It's different in NGOs. It's different in government agencies for whatever reason. So unwilling to share isn't a big issue. Unable, because of lack of knowledge, is a much bigger issue. much bigger issue. And that's what I sort of would want to talk about. What can people actually do? I mean, it's fun talking about this, but unless we say, well, what could be done, it becomes sort of a nice rhetorical exercise. And organizations, I said, this is the holy grail for them. You can show a great deal of monetary value in doing things like this. I mean, you can really show the accounting of what it would take if people knew what they knew. There's a famous quote in knowledge management, still true. A guy from Hewlett-Packard said, the CEO said, if we knew what we knew, we'd be 3 times more profitable. But that must be true here. If you knew what you knew, you'd be 3 times more efficient. It's true anywhere. But knowing what you know is a tricky business, isn't it? Here's what makes it tricky, and then we'll talk about what can be done. How do you measure knowledge? If I asked you, now this is an organization that's as knowledge intensive as any organization on this planet. I'll tell you that. It's something I could say pretty authoritatively. Where is the knowledge in NASA? Let's say a Martian. You find one up there. I don't know if I'll live long enough, but some of you may live longer. You find a Martian, oh, you work for NASA. It's a pretty smart place. Where is the knowledge in NASA? How would you answer that? It's in the people. But by the time you get to Mars, a lot of you are going to be retired. But NASA's still going to know how to come back from Mars. So it has to be more than just the current people. Isn't that true? Your knowledge is a good assumption. I mean, NASA started. There's very few of you around today who worked when it was started, and you still know, more. So where else?
To me, what NASA is great at is when there's a defined challenge or problem, you find the people, because it's all context specific. Frank said was exactly right. Because knowledge is, if it's a political issue, there are people in NASA who know the politics. If there's an issue in terms of the technological discipline, there are people in each of those different people who know the issue. If it's how do you get something through the budget or contracting, there are people in contracts who know how to work it, and then there are 80% of the people you better stay away from. And so, but it's totally context driven. But it's about and the people who are around here long enough, people who are successful, they know where the knowledge is in terms of the people. And and sometimes what we do is probably dangerous if we keep that quiet.
Well, why do you keep it quiet?
Shit, if I know somebody in contracting who can make my stuff go fast, and I can rely on them, there's only a certain amount of, capacity that they can
That's
handle.
right. So if you tell John and Joe know, and you get put to the back of the room if they get to that person first, and they develop the relationship.
There's a handful of people in Washington headquarters who know how to get my money from where I need it to a center. And if that person or those people are overloaded, you got a big problem.
So the knowledge in NASA is not only in people's heads, it's in the relationships between people, the space between people, the context, which is absolutely true. Where else is it?
I think it's in the next generation also.
Well, how is it transmitted to them?
I think it's transmitted for the outreach programs.
So the programs that seed future knowledge. Where else?
It's in our processes.
It's in your processes and routines. Absolutely right. The way you do things. It's in the actual, pardon?
That's your experience.
Yes,
All your experience.
and the documented routines and the experiences plugged together. The practices, the way you do something. I've been, listening to you. The way, that's where the knowledge is. Yeah.
At the same time, the process is also where the vast majority of stuff that gets lost.
It gets lost in the sense of it doesn't always get captured, but if NASA knows, capital K, how to do things because people know how to do it, they know who to go to, and they know the routines and the processes. If I did a CAT scan of NASA, that's where the knowledge would show up. People, the relationships, if you could somehow draw lines to one another, the context and the routines. It's not in the documentation. It could be, but very few people look things up in documentation when they want to know something. They pick up the phone. The problem with all this, and this is very useful, very interesting, is what it's called the satisficing problem. A man named Herbert Simon wrote about this 50 years ago. He won the Nobel Prize for doing this, among other things. And he called it the whale spleen problem, which is, this is before the internet. And he said, if I stopped you on the street and said, here's $100. If you can tell me, I'll give you 2 phone calls. Does a whale have a spleen? Before the web. Well, you know what you do, right? Who can I call? I could pick that. How do I make 2 calls to get to someone who would answer that phone and tell me if a whale has a spleen? Generally, we sort of use the whale spleen problem in that we will go to the people closest to us to get answers. And as soon as we get an answer that's just good enough, we'll stop, because the added effort is harder. Unless it's life or death, and even then, I've seen studies. Yeah, but you know, if you do Googling, and I do, we all do this, there's a hell of a lot of important stuff that isn't there, and there's a lot of crap that is there. And it's hard, although you're right, you can find out the whale spleen, I bet on that one. But there's a lot of very important things that are, I mean, it's not managed though, it's just stuff. Some is very valuable, very useful. It hasn't increased the knowledge productivity anywhere near as much as you think it would.
Well, it's brand new.
It's brand new. Maybe it might, yeah, you're right, when it becomes more commercial, perhaps.
20 years of it. You got 20 years of it, and you got
Let's-
5 years of it being nearly serviceable.
Well, let me ask you another question. How much of what you know can you document? Let me ask you, how much of what you know, pick a subject you know.
Depends on how disciplined I want to be.
Well, let's say someone gives you a lot of money and 3 months off. How much of what you know about a bounded subject, so not about life but something that's bounded, project management, let's say, something you know about, how much can you think you could document, even with a large amount of time and money? So you have incentives and you have freedom.
A whole lot.
You think so?
Yeah.
You think so? How many of you think it's a big number that you could document? A couple of you. It's an interesting. How many of you think not? Yeah, that's what I think.
I think it depends on the subject.
Yeah, well, some of you really know a lot about project management. You've studied it a lot. I mean, people in this room who really know this.
I think project management is probably would be the most challenging to try and capture, but that the functions that support project management are probably where you should concentrate on a more systematic type of activities and knowledge that these managers need. If you focus your effort on virtually understanding them and systematizing how you organize it so you can recollect it.
Right, and put it and document it, yeah.
Well, not document it, just make it where it's accessible. I guess it is documented.
It would be documented. But was that how you work? If you had a sticky issue,
Yes, I am.
how about, if you have a sticky issue, what do you do? You've been talking about problems, and what do people do here? I've been listening for, at least to some of it. They talk about it. They don't read about it, they talk about it. Why is that? It's easier.
Everything is the relationship. You can have the best invention, and you can have somebody else who has a shitty one, but if they do a better job of the relationship aspect, it'll go in that direction. And part of the discussion in terms of contacting your knowledge folks is not only can they tell you how it can work or what the answer is. And getting the knowledge is one part of it, but I think it's a small part. It's also then how do you use it, who's going to help you use it, how do you make the connections, how do you make sure you do it in a way so that they don't have to kill you when you have the right answer. I mean, the issue is that way. I've been in rooms in terms of senior executives who authorize you going this direction, but behind all this, make sure that doesn't happen. You want to have that happen? Well, it's human nature. And so it's not just having the, things get worked in terms of, I wasn't here yesterday, I heard the discussion in terms of projects reported or owned by the mission director. Everybody that has to know it's going to get done at a center. And you are a moron if you're a center director and you don't pay attention to that. Because if you have a center that doesn't have a reputation, isn't doing programs and projects, you have a center that's basically dead. So whatever gets articulated, there are reasons for it. But you know that the relationship and the reputation is what drives things. So you can have a document and it can give you good information, it's useful, but it's the stuff in between that document that will determine success, failure. And I've seen brilliant people who do all the right things by our documents, and they keep getting hammered, and they can't figure out why. And it's because society doesn't work by what we say it works. It works by the relationship and by all these other things.
if I can just put that in somewhat different phraseology, though I completely agree. There are knowledge is the space between the information. Knowledge of how to do things, which is exactly what knowledge is profoundly social and profoundly political. Two true statements about knowledge. It's not Cartesian. It's not, information is. There's a lot of science, a lot of technology, a lot of engineering. That's Cartesian. It's out there. It's true. I mean, most of us would believe that. That's how we do what we do. But that's information, and that's data. Knowledge is a different subject. It's based on information, based on experiences, but it's political and it's social, and it's somewhat of a different subject. It's more valuable. You spend more money for it. If information was the ultimate source of value, a 12-year-old kid with a laptop would know as much as you and me, but they don't, and they'll never will. That'll never happen. Tom Friedman has this popular book called The World is Flat. Some of you may have read it. And I recently wrote an article rebutting that, saying the world is round. It's not, the technology does not level playing fields. If it did, a lot of the stuff you do is documented. There's a lot of documentation, but there's no other NASA. And if a country wanted to make another, it'd cost a huge amount of money, time, and effort, as you well know. There's a difference between information and knowledge is a trickier thing, and it's hard to measure. When firms or organizations try to measure knowledge, here's what they do generally. This is why it's tricky. Some measure the knowledge of individuals. It's called human capital accounting. So how many degrees do you have? How long have you worked at NASA? How many books have you published? How many projects did you work on? That's a reasonable human capital accounting. Organizations do this. They go to Wall Street to raise money, say, here's the amount of people we have who have 3 degrees and know this. They do it for all, you get promoted, you get benefits. That's one way to do that. Another thing, some organizations measure what groups know, what practices know, what divisions know. So it's a group measurement. Some call it communities of practice. You heard Northrop talk about that yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Communities of practice, practices, networks, groups, divisions, centers. You can measure it that way. Some measure the whole enterprise. Our company, our organization knows this. That's the unit of analysis, the company. Some use documents. I mean, our knowledge repository has 8 million reports in it. Therefore, we have a lot of knowledge. Different units, there's no agreed upon unit of analysis, which makes it very tricky to compare organizational knowledge and organizational count, because people don't agree. What would be an accurate way to measure it? The UN, OECD, the EU, and the SEC are looking at this issue. There's a lot of people, because what's the value of having one unit of analysis? Well, for capital markets, it'd be much better to make investments if you knew what an organization knew. You're going to invest money in a pharmaceutical firm. If there was a standard unit of analysis, you can invest. And that's even true for government agencies. You can say, here's what we know, and here's what NASA, here's how much we've invested in knowledge. Here's a way of proving it. Now, we need more knowledge to do this. You'd make a very effective case for your own budgets. But there's no agreed upon. This is a brand new subject, 10, 15 years old. So we're still studying it, and that's a real problem. There's no unit of analysis. Think about it. It's hard to measure this. Universities talk about publications. Our faculty published this many books. That's one way to do it. Other places say, here's what we've accomplished. IBM, every year, leads the commercial world in technology patents. They're number 1. That's their unit. We measure patents as a proxy for knowledge. It's not bad. I mean, it makes sense. There's various ways of doing this, but it's not unified. So it's hard to compare countries, although there's a huge effort. You mentioned going on. How would you compare a country like Singapore, Israel, Finland? Very high tech, very high technology type of cultures with other countries that have a lot of people and a lot of land, but they don't produce patents. I mean, it's a different issues. Very, very tricky thing, although as I said, it's the holy grail. If you can do this well, because if you can have a unified unit of analysis, you'd know what to do. You can start doing management techniques and tools to make it better. So having said that, What can you do? I hate to just talk about a subject, say, this is really interesting, then you go back, say, well, that was interesting, but what the hell do we do about it? There are things you can do. Now, you don't run NASA, you don't run the US government. I don't know what to do about a lot of this stuff myself if I had control of an organization. But I'll tell you some things that have worked in organizations that you can do, that you have the power to do within yourself. Let's start with one that Ed sort of referred to obliquely, trust. There is no collaboration without trust. If you don't trust someone, you might tell them the capital of France. You might tell them the GMP of Morocco. You might tell them pi to the 25th function, because that's not valuable. But would you tell them the name of someone in the budget department who knows how to do certain things? That's real knowledge, and unless you really trusted someone, you're not going to share that. No one does that. People don't share knowledge without trust. Now, trust comes in, this is a whole subject, there's about 30 books on this subject. Trust comes in two varieties. One variety all of us live by. It's one of the strongest factors in human psychology, and it's a fancy name. It's called specific reciprocity, which simply means if I do a favor for you, what do you owe me? A favor. How strong is that in people, in general? Pretty strong. It's called the gift finite. It's really strong. Someone does not just sends you a document, well, that's a minor favor, but really spends an hour of their time talking to you that's not on their agenda. They're doing it as you call someone and say, shit, I'm busy as hell, but I'll spend an hour at between 9 and 10 tonight talking. That's a real favor. When you ask them for a favor, they're going to feel pretty strongly that they owe it to you. It'd be pretty rare for someone to say, well, sorry, you helped me, but I'm not going to help you. Very few people will say that. Very few. Maybe some. Some might, but not many. That's called specific reciprocity. We all live by that. What about general reciprocity? Where you'll help someone without the expectation of a return. Where you don't owe them anything, but you're doing it for the flag, for the country. You see that more in life and death. Of course, you'd see it more in the military, although there's people in the military that argue otherwise. But in general, in organizations, that's fairly rare, isn't it?
Not at NASA.
Not at NASA. Good, that's true. That's good. So people would put aside their own work and help someone spend a lot of time. That's great. I think it probably is truer here, because there's a mission, than it would be at Citicorp or IBM or Northrop. Sometimes what firms do and organizations do, however, to keep this going is have what we call enforceable social norms, where if the social norm is cooperation, you enforce it. Let me give you an example. Let's tell you stories, because I completely believe in stories. I work part-time for a management consulting firm called McKinsey. Just part-time. Pays the rent. When I started there was a young woman who I'm working with. Her name's Lee Weiss. She's a middle to lower middle management. And I was in her office. She said, I just got this request from the Gates Foundation, what it was. They're interested in a proposal to help them do something. I said, what are you going to do about that? She says, well, I found on our expertise system 12 people at McKinsey who have written proposals like this and have expertise about helping foundations. Great, that's terrific. Now, they all had documents in this system, but the documents weren't that relevant to what she needed. They're old, they weren't quite on issue. You've got to really respond exactly what they want. So I said, what are you going to do? You can't read all that stuff. They want to purposes. I'm going to call each of these people up. 12 people I'm going to call and say, I need you to call me back between these hours. I have 24 hours. I said, Lee, 10 of those 12 people are senior to you. They're all traveling around the world. Some of them weren't in the United States, some of them weren't in the Western or even in Europe. I said, that's not going to work. She says, watch. She called 12. I came in Monday. I said, what was the results? She said, all 12 responded. I know this woman really well. I can hardly believe that. That's absolutely unique in management consulting. But it was true, because McKinsey enforces a social norm of cooperation. And what do I mean by that? If someone didn't respond to her, well, okay. But the odds are they wouldn't respond to someone else. maybe 3 months from now, who are junior to them. Eventually, and it's quick, that knowledge gets around, that this person's not responsive. And no matter how good they are, in a year or two, they say, maybe you should find a different place to work. That's an enforceable social norm. And in that case, it works. Don Cohen and I wrote a case. We did some research in an executive recruiting firm called Russell Reynolds. And they told us about they had a chance to hire a tremendous recruiter, headhunter. Guy had a list of contacts a mile long. He knew everyone, made $1 zillion, but he only worked for himself. He'll do it all. He won't share leads. He won't share information. And the head of that firm told us, I'm not going to hire this person. Although he'd bring in millions of dollars in revenue, the example he sets, the signal he sets, is wrong for this firm. That's an enforceable social norm. When you don't have a mission except to make money, you better do that. Even when you have it, it's not a bad idea. One of the strongest ways of enforcing these things, it's not asking people to leave, is who gets promoted. There's been a great deal of research showing that's a signal that's stronger than any organizational rhetoric or communication. Because when someone gets promoted, it's telling the rest of you, this person does the right thing. And if they got promoted and they're an opportunist, if they're self-serving, if they're a known son of a bitch, that's a terrific signal to everyone, saying, this is what we care about. You promote other sorts of people, you get other. There's nothing stronger. It's about as strong, I've read some studies about, as when children watch their parents. Tell your kids not to smoke, and you smoke a lot. I've worked for 7 major management consulting firms. All but one of them said, we really want our management consultants to keep abreast of the literature, to develop ideas, to be thought leaders, to really understand the issues. All they did, with one exception, was promote salespeople. They never promoted people who actually developed ideas. Now, I'm not saying it's so bad to promote salespeople, but as soon as that happens, everyone says, well, they say this, but of course, I'm not going to spend that extra hour writing that article. I'm going to go write another proposal. It's just rational, intended rationality. So those signals are hugely important, as are the symbols of cooperation. There are symbols and there are signals. The architecture of buildings is a great symbol and signal of cooperation and collaboration. When you go into an office, 100 closed doors, no open space, no space for talking, no space for meeting. It's a big signal, isn't it? I've been doing some work on knowledge spaces, and there's a big pharmaceutical firm, in fact, Novartis. Have you ever heard of that firm? Big firm out in Basel. They have 22 ugly buildings in Basel, 19th century industrial buildings. One by one, they're taking down these buildings, leveling them, rebuilding them on knowledge principles, which means there's some private space, much public space, and the symbol and signal, each floor, each work area has an Italian coffee station. This is great stuff. Marble tables, wire-back chairs, espresso, and biscotti. And it's free. And this is a Swiss firm line. These people love money. I mean, this is Switzerland. We're not talking about, Mother Teresa's missionary, man. These people love money. For them to do that is a tremendous signal saying, we want people to stop, have some coffee, and talk to other people. And, we're not going to monitor you talking about your kids' soccer scores or talking about a new molecule. It's a tremendous signal that knowledge is social, and it needs to be flowed. It needs to be stirred around. I can give you many examples of this, counter examples, really. Dawn and I would think of writing a book about this. When the Harvard Business School, which is not what I'm talking about, they got a lot of money about 10, 15 years ago to put up a new building, Shad Hall. That building, now this is a school that teaches leadership and teamwork. That building had not one public space. It is everyone on their own bottom. It's completely closed offices. No one thought of the signal they're giving to executives or people who want to be executives that, gee, what about some common space where people can meet and talk and discuss issues? Nope. It's all pecking order and private space. It's remarkable the signals that gives.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about enforceable norms, and I think there's another level below the radar, though. It's a really difficult one, which is you know somebody who has the information you want, but they're such a pain in the ass that you don't want to go there. And
That's a
that may
great
not be
issue.
something that's
Absolutely
an
right.
enforceable thing, where it's at the level of rising to management, but that
No,
call
you're
to
right.
help you do something, but oh my gosh, I just don't want to deal with Carl and go around him.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely,
I
this is
can't.
a huge issue, and, I'll have to tell you a story about this. A very well-known management consultant, but this time I'm not going to tell you their name. We did a social network analysis. This guy, Rob Cross, is at Virginia, and I did this for this firm, and it was their practice, the people who consulted to the leisure and hotel industry. And it turned out there are two people in the middle of the network who everyone had to go to. These were men in their 50s who knew everyone in that industry. They had been there 20 years, they wrote about it, but they were terrible people. And everyone wrote, when I talk to this person, I feel worse after talking to them. But you couldn't fire them. You'd lose the practice. So I asked, we presented this. You had no names, but you could see this. You ever see those social network diagrams? They look like bowls of spaghetti. It's linkages to people. And there are people who are right in the heart of it, right there, and there are those in the outliers. These guys were right. You couldn't even see the lines. It was so dense. So we asked the head of the practice who was sitting there, he said, what are you going to do about these guys? And he said, Jesus, I just don't. And the guys were in the room, and they knew it. They knew it. That's who they were. They viewed that as a perk of being successful, that they can just let it all loose. Like famous entertainers are like that. The same thing. A lot of people, when they rise up in life, view it as a perk to be a jerk to you, especially, no, it's true. I'm not making this up. This is true. Well, I'm not going to talk about, see what just happened at Harvard? I mean, this is not exactly an unknown thing. If you can find this in the Bible, probably, I haven't read Hammurabi, but I bet it's there too. So, what did this guy do? He had an interesting, it's a fascinating dilemma in real life. This is why this isn't a science. What he did, and it's probably the best answer we could give, he found two people who wanted to learn what those people knew, who were mid managers, who had thick skins, and they would be the buffers for those people. So you go to them first, and they could take the abuse because they wanted to learn a lot. And it was a jerry-built answer, but it was an answer because exit and loyalty didn't work. You weren't going to get rid of them. You had to find some, and sending them emails, they just didn't respond. You had to go to them because they liked socking it to you. I mean, these are really managerial dilemmas around knowledge. We're fooling around, but it's a very serious issue. That's why I said knowledge is social. It's profoundly social. The person who has the knowledge it's hard to separate. In fact, it's impossible to separate the knowledge from the person who has it or the group that has it. You can separate information. If you ask me my address, I can write it on a piece of paper, and there's my address. That's information. But if you ask me what's it like to live in the town you live in, that's more knowledge, and that's inseparable from who I am. I might like certain things or dislike certain things. So.
It seems like things that are beyond knowledge.
Well, there are things beyond knowledge.
I mean, like a superstar.
Oh, yeah, there's wisdom.
You can go and ask him how
He couldn't tell you.
No, he can't.
No,
And
you're
I
right.
think those people that are as gifted as you're describing, I don't think
It's true for you too. It's called tacit knowledge. There's knowledge you can write down, and tacitness. And tacitness means knowledge that no matter what you say, it'd be very difficult to describe. The classic book about this is by a great scientist named Michael Polanyi, who wrote about how could you tell someone to ride a bicycle? They'd have to ride the bicycle. You can tell them, but it really is pretty poor. How to swim. Remember how when you learn how to swim, if you tell your kids how to swim? What NASA is like. You could tell me. Ed's told me. I've known him for a while. But it's real different listening to him, although he has deep knowledge, tacit and otherwise, at NASA, than actually working here, even at a part-time level. It's been estimated that most valuable knowledge, especially athletics, physical things, painters, architects, scientists too, it's tacit. They can't tell you what they do, they just know how to do it. If you go to a foreign country, it's sort of like that. If you travel around, similar things. This fellow had a question first, I'm sorry.
I was referring back to your study you did. The individual you did the study for didn't realize these two were like the center cog, or was he looking for a justification and excuse to go ahead and make the change.
I'm glad you asked that. Very often, when you discuss a problem in a larger group and you make the problem visible, it forces the function. He knew it. Of course he knew it. But when you made it visible, look at these people. Their positions in this network are absolutely vital. And yet, we asked him, 80% said they hate talking to this person. And he was in the room. It was a room this size with about this many people. It forced him to act. It's a valuable thing to learn. That's a tacit sort of thing. How do you get something like that done?
Yeah, it's just a discussion reminded me of a point that, I like baseball, so I just make baseball.
I like it too.
Ted Williams, was a great hitter.
Put him
When
on.
he retired, he became a coach. He couldn't coach.
He couldn't coach, right.
Because he couldn't understand why, and he would tell the players, when you see the stitches on the ball, and you can know, and you gotta be born a certain way to see the stitches on the ball. You can't teach that. And my point was, even when the person's not a jerk, sometimes passing knowledge along is a skill.
It's more, not sometimes, it's always a skill, and it can be taught to some extent. My father bought me that. I have a vision problem. And my father bought me that book, The Art of Hitting by Ted Williams. I had it too, and I read it, and it did me no good at all. And I could really read. Believe me, I can read and I can memorize, but I couldn't hit because it's tacit. I didn't have the equipment. It's just not in me to do that well, although my father meant well, excuse me. A lot of things, but there is an art to transferring knowledge directly. And you guys, that's what you study that. That's what a lot of the stuff, that's what's going on in this room. And that's what a lot of project management's about. You may use the language of engineering and science. It's the lingua franca of knowledge, of a NASA. But the truth is, you learn by participating. You learn by doing. And that's why these projects are so important. And that's why so many of you know so many things, because you do things. If this was just a course in aeronautics or a course in engineering, space engineering, you might remember it and you can replicate the words, but you wouldn't know with a capital K how to do what you do. It's absolutely, this stuff still is not taught that way. It's taught here as best it can be, and the fact that Dawn and I and Ed and a lot of these people are really interested in this, but this is advanced stuff. Many organizations, if you do training and development, the pits has nothing to do with knowledge or anything like we're talking about. It's just crap, and it's best avoided. This is very state-of-the-art stuff you're doing here.
I was thinking along the lines of Ted Williams' example, tacit knowledge. I tried to learn the keyboard as a child, and I read the books, I took lessons, I could read the music, I could play the notes. I could not make the music.
That's a good example. Yeah, that's like me hitting that ball. That's right.
And my father never knew how to read music. He was an excellent drummer, played professionally. All they had to do was put a pair of speakers so he could hear the other music and he could play.
Yeah, there's certainly an issue, especially in things like the arts and athletics, where having a gift for it is a necessity and not having it as a barrier. But I'm thinking of your example. One example of a way to transmit what seems like deeply tacit knowledge is, say, a musician's master class. Now, it's from talent to talent, but it's using a process that's a combination of example, imitation, verbal hints that seem kind of oblique. Someone will say, well, play it with more color. They don't explain it what it is. The person tries again and says, no, play it with more color. It's a complicated process of kind of shared experience that can communicate something very tacit.
I saw one, Ruster Provich, do the cello master class at the BA. It's exactly that. But that's what you're doing here. That's what happens. It can be done with science and engineering as well as music and athletics. But you have to participate. Knowledge is not, it's experience and participation. It's very different than information. I use, when I give these courses, if someone said to you, here's X amount of dollars. Well, let's take something more. You graduate from college with a degree in chemistry. Are you a chemist? Would a chemist call you a chemist? They call you a rookie. Say, what does it take to be a chemist? Doing chemistry. where other chemists would say you're a chemist when you do chemistry, and you know it tacitly. You could look at a situation quickly and say, oh yeah, that's clearly not enough hydrogen. It's true here, it's true in any organization. One is information retention, the other is knowledge. And the knowledge is acquired by doing things, participating, experiencing, and acting. In some ways, knowledge management is the wrong word, although I helped bring it about. It really is knowing management. It's an active verb. We're talking about something that's actively done. It's knowing rather than knowledge. Knowledge implies storages of information, which is fine, but knowledge, it's really knowing. NASA knows how to do something. A lot of you know, all of you know how to do certain things. So let's go back a little bit. I want to just make one or two. What can you actually do? One thing you can do is encourage trust by entrusting others. We've learned over the years, we meaning social science researchers, that trust is contagious, that it reaches tipping points and critical periods, and if enough people entrust others, the culture of trust is contagious. It will spread, just as the culture of mistrust. Both things are true, but it's contagious. It spreads from like a virus. And you can entrust others and have it spread. Let me give you a personal story about this. I ran a research institute for IBM, and I had about 30 people working for me. Many of them traveled a great deal. And they had to submit travel reports, electronically, and I was supposed to look at all these and see, you went to Boise, but business class, bad. You have to go coach, Monitor all their travel, where they stayed, what sort of flights they took. If I did that, three things would occur. It would take up half the time. IBM's paying me a great deal of money for something. If I spent half my time doing that, it was something a clerk could do. I mean, why did they need me? I had, to do that. Two, it would bore me to pieces, and I just couldn't stand doing it. But three, it was worthless. These people I had hired, I liked them, they liked me, and I brought them into a room, and I said, I'm never going to look at your travel reports. I'm going to approve them sight unseen. What happens when you say that? You're entrusting others. So the burden is on them to break the trust. Right? I'm saying, I'm not going to look at them. I get in some trouble if it got caught, if someone went to Boise business class or stayed at a Marriott rather than the 7-Eleven or wherever the hell they want the people to stay. I mean, it would come down to me, and my person I reported to would slap my wrist. But do you think it was worth any of those people? Would they do it? Would they cheat that way? Because it's asymmetric. It wouldn't be worth it, right? One business class trip, one nice hotel, and it breaks the trust with me. It can't be worth it. It's a bad cost-benefit analysis. And by me entrusting them, they then entrusted others. They viewed that as an example, and the trust became contagious, and nothing evil ever happened. And IBM got a much better deal because they're paying me a lot of money to do research and develop things. They didn't pay me, it just seemed to me absolutely ludicrous for me to spend 2 days. I mean, those are big reports. They make people talk cabs, if you ate a Frankfurter rather than a hamburger. I mean, it was crazy. Micromanagement to an anal degree. It was just nuts. I'm sure you right, you all know what I'm talking. Anyway, so trust is contagious. So you can spread trust yourself. This is something that's bottoms up. It's not top down. No one trusts management anywhere. That's a general rule. People do not trust going up. They trust laterally. You want to encourage lateral trust. People at your level maybe one above you, one below you. Very rarely do people trust people at the top. This country has a problem with that. It's not something I can solve. But if you do, the surveys show that most people do not trust the people who run their organizations. They feel that they got those jobs through being a certain types of characters, and they don't trust them. That may not be true. God hopes it's not true here, but generally it's true. But they trust their colleagues. They trust their peers. They trust you, and you trust others. And without trust, no knowledge gets exchanged and no collaboration. Not real knowledge, not real collaboration. You may fake it. You may give, what's the capital of France? Paris, boom. You don't need trust for that. So trust can be done. Another thing you can do that's more, I like what you were saying, that's more system-wide, is let people know who knows what in an intuitive, clean way. Connectivity is a much better way to spend your money than collection. People generally, although it's good to have documents, I write, I read, we all want to do this, but generally connectivity is really important. So if you want to know who knows what, find some way, and firms are doing this. This is something that can be done, of having taxonomies that are intuitive, really clearly understandable, so that you can look up someone, oh, that person knows this. Let them say what they know as well as you telling them. I worked for Ernst & Young, another interesting firm, for a number of years. And the day I joined, now they recruited me. Once again, they said, oh, we really want you. I got a big skills questionnaire, 8 pages. Fill out the skills for our system. I didn't have one skill on that 8 pages. Can you program in C++? Are you familiar with this system? I said, oh, shit, I don't know this stuff. I wanted the question, why did you hire me? I mean, I don't have one skill that's on this page. I mean, some jerk devised that stuff. So let people, the ones that work better are ones where you can ask people what you know, but have them write their experiences, their publications, and let them say what they know. Give them a paragraph. And then you can search by words. So even though you may have worked in Marshall or Goddard, and you've done this and this, you have a deep interest in something else. I know there's people, that's certainly true for most people that are quite intellectually curious. Let them say that too. Don't just limit it to your own experiences, and let them search by words. This is all doable. This is not, it's not rocket science. And firms are doing this all the time. I see this, there's organizations that do. So that's really helpful, rather than, and it's a great, it won't substitute for what Ed's talking about. People are still going to use their informal networks. Nothing on this planet will ever eliminate that unless humans evolve. And that's not going to happen in our lifetime. I mean, if you get human beings evolve differently, but as of today, everyone will use their networks. But if you're junior or middle, or you're in an area where you don't have networks, even Ed might not know someone in some areas, you can use a system. So we out of time? Should I ask that one? Okay. Okay. I just wanted 1 or 2 more quick points on this, what you can do, because I thought that might be, rather than do that, let me sum up some of these points. This is really an important subject. How people collaborate, how you can help people collaborate. It's the golden, it's what everyone's looking for. It's optimizing your investments, your knowledge investments. It's optimizing what an organization like this knows. By not doing it, you're really wasting brain power, money, time. It's a real waste. We just don't know a lot about it. It's not taught in the schools. You can get a PhD, and there's very few MBA schools that even teach this, although it's the most important thing there is from my perspective. I can't answer why that's the case. It's a great mystery to me. It's hugely important, and you can do things. You can put in small systems. You can share your knowledge with others proactively without specific reciprocity. You can trust people. And just as much as anything else, you can talk about knowledge. Voltaire once said, people wouldn't fall in love if they never heard the word. I don't know if that's true or not, but if you never talk about knowledge, if we only talk about information, systems, or data, that's all people are going to work with. If you talk about knowledge, say, what does those people know? What does NASA know? What goes on in terms of knowledge in this organization? Tools and approaches and valuations and measures will emerge if you talk about it. If we never measure it, if we never talk about it, nothing will ever happen. Not only do things get measured, that things are only measured that are actually measurable, but if you never say something, if you never talk about something, nothing will ever happen. So at that point, I'm going to stop talking. Maybe you have 1 or 2 more questions if there's any. A lot of you people have gone through a rigorous couple of days.